Hi, abnormal psychology students. In this session, we are going to talk about the behavioral view. And this is one of my favorite examples of behaviorism. These ski patrol dogs up at Lake Tahoe are so well trained and cooperate beautifully with everything that the ski patrol wants them to do, and that includes riding up on a chairlift. Now, this is a frightening experience for a lot of humans, and dogs do not belong up in the air. They are ground-dwelling animals, but they are so compliant that they will get on the lift, even as puppies. Look how young this one is, and go up and do their work for the day with the ski patrol at, in this case, Heavenly Valley. So let's talk about how we get humans and animals to be trained like this. So behaviorism, the focus is on our responses to stimuli. So stimulus is anything that triggers you, anything you're exposed to, and you give a behavioral response. So stimuli are people, they are events, they are all kinds of situations. And behaviorism focuses on our responses to those stimuli and the consequences of those responses. We may get reinforcement, something we like, or punishment, something we do not like. Now, reinforcement and punishment are specific to the individual. We cannot always guarantee that a particular reinforcement will actually be a reinforcement to the individual receiving it. Let's say you guys all do really well in a quiz and I want to celebrate, and I come into class with a whole bunch of chocolate covered crickets and I pass them all out to you and I say, great job on the quiz, here you go. Not too many of you are going to really want a chocolate covered cricket. Maybe you would like to post a picture of it, but you certainly aren't going to eat it. So in addition to that, our punishments are not always punishing to everyone. For example, I've been to 5 prisons, and some of the men there don't see prison as a punishment. They see prison as a place of refuge where they know the rules and they're unlikely to be hurt, and they get, quote, 3 hots and a cot each day. So we really need to make sure that our reinforcement is something that the organism really wants and will work for, and our punishments are really something that the organism, human or animal, doesn't want and will work to avoid. Behaviorists believe that our behavior is learned through a process of conditioning us through offering these consequences. So conditioning or learning is applying reinforcement and punishment to create and maintain the behaviors that we want to see. So to change behavior, we must change the consequences of behavior. So a really good example of this is a team that I know went into a mental health facility to try to see what kinds of conditions should be changed in order to bring about better behavior on the part of the patients. The nurses' station had glass all the way around it, but the glass didn't go to the ceiling. So the patients occupied themselves and entertained themselves by shooting spit wads up over the glass and onto the nurses. So the team went in to see, are we really going to have to make the glass go way up to the ceiling, which in this case would be quite an expense? Or is there a way that we can get the patients not to do this behavior? So it's that kind of thing where we want to change the consequences of the behavior. So either the nurses have to not react, so there's no reinforcement for the patient's behavior, or they have to institute a punishment that is serious enough to get the patients to not want to do the behavior. So behaviorism is actually the study of observable, very important, observable behavior that focuses on the role of learning in explaining behavior. They believe that human behavior is the product of environmental influences that shape and manipulate behavior. Behaviorism suggests that you could take any baby and provide the learning conditions to reinforce them to have any kind of personality and skills that you want them to have, which is a pretty fascinating idea when you think about it. One of the original behaviorists, John Watson, said, "Give me a baby and I can make him into a butcher, a baker, or a candlestick maker." And that's from a popular children's rhyme. So think about that. Think about yourself. When you were born, was it possible that anyone that had the opportunity to give you a reinforcement or a punishment could have shaped you into being exactly the person you are today, or a very different person from the one that you are today? Therefore, in the future, let's say you decide to become a psychology professional, or you become a supervisor or a manager of people, or a parent. Think about how great it would be if you totally understood reinforcement and punishment as consequences for behavior, so that you could promote the best behaviors in your clients, your employees, or your kids. Think how powerful that would make you. It's developed from the work of Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov is very famous for his work with his dog Suki. John Watson implemented all kinds of explanations and examples of how we can condition humans, and he was pretty famous for doing the experiment with the white bunny. And Harvard University psychologist B.F. Skinner is really famous for coming up with the Skinner box, where when all the conditions are completely controlled, we can train a rat or any animal that we can put inside a box, including a human, to do whatever we want them to do. And B.F. Skinner's pretty well known for putting his daughter in a box and training her. So operant conditioning is what we call the form of learning in which behavior is acquired and strengthened when it is reinforced. And reinforcement is defined as changes in the environment that increase the frequency of the preceding behavior. So again, if it's truly a reinforcement for you, when you receive it, it'll make you want to do the behavior again to achieve that reinforcement again. So operant conditioning talks about positive reinforcers, reinforcers that, when introduced, increase the frequency of the preceding behavior. Negative reinforcers that, when removed, increase the frequency of the preceding behavior. So this is kind of tricky. Both of these terms have the word reinforcer in it. The positive one is pretty easy to understand, but negative reinforcer, we have a hard time with this negative idea. But I want you to think about here, positive reinforcers are, gee, you did a great job. We're going to give you some money, okay? Gee, you haven't been doing a great job, so we're withholding your money. We're not paying you anymore. We're removing this reinforcer. You start doing a good job, we'll give you your money back. Okay, so punishment, the application of aversive or painful stimuli that reduces the frequency of the behavior it follows. If it's truly punishing, you've produced a response that gets a punishment, chances are you're not going to produce that response again. If we see you producing that response over and over when we're applying this same punishment, we have to conclude that that's not a very punishing experience for you. That little bird is pretty great, right? Okay, so the behavioral model shows us that we're kind of in a loop. We have a stimulus, we produce a response, we get a consequence, then we're exposed to the next stimulus, we produce a response, we experience a consequence. And that is the cycle of the behavioral model. So what we want to do with behavior modification is we want to determine the stimuli and the consequence of the behavior. And if we're not getting the response we want, we change the consequences of behavior. So here it is, operant conditioning: stimulus, response, consequence. So abnormal functioning, according to the behaviorists, comes when people are reinforced maladaptively. Now, maladaptively means for your culture, for the expectations, the values, the ethics in your culture. Somebody reinforced you maladaptively, and now you're considered abnormal. So I'll tell you about one of my cases. I had this little boy referred to me who was 9, and he and his sister were removed from their parents because they were being reinforced maladaptively, and they were producing maladaptive responses at school. The maladaptive reinforcement was, unfortunately, that the parents were having sex with both of their kids. And the little girl was only 6, the little boy was only 9. And the little boy that I worked with thought it was normal to have sexual experience with your parents. And until he brought it up at school and somebody said, "Ew, you're not supposed to be doing that," and reported it to the teacher, he really didn't know anything was wrong with it. So his parents were giving him reinforcement for a maladaptive behavior that's unacceptable in our society. So this little boy was seen as abnormal by his culture, but not by his parents. So fortunately, the children were removed from those parents and probably never reunited with those parents, because that kind of behavior is too abnormal in our culture. So, okay, I got to tell you what happened. So my office was on Coffee Road across from Downey Park. So I took him over there and we were throwing the frisbee around, and I was developing rapport with him so he'd feel comfortable talking to me. And all of a sudden this man comes up and exposes himself to us. Well, that's really not helpful for a kid that I'm seeing for abnormal sexual behavior. So I brought him back to my office and I said, "What that man did is not okay, and I'm going to call the police right now and tell them that he did that so that they can go and arrest him and put him in jail so he can't expose himself to anybody else." And all the kid did was look at me and say, "Well, you looked." But at least I was able to show him that there were consequences of that behavior. Modeling is the most significant way people learn, according to the behaviorists, and they learn by observing and repeating behavior. But sometimes people observe maladaptive behavior, and therefore they are considered abnormal. So, another ski example, and boy, am I sad I'm skipping ski season this year. By now I would have had 10 or 15 days of skiing in. Oh well, there's always next year. So, people observe maladaptive behavior. What's a good example of this? Oh, we had a family of clients who lived in a nearby town, and the father believed that there were radon waves coming from outer space and contaminating he and his family, so he lined his whole house with aluminum foil with the shiny part pointing out. That was no problem until eventually they realized that he wasn't sending his kids to school. So the authorities went there to try to talk to them about what kind of schooling these kids were going to have. At that time, when they were talking to the kids and the mom and the kids believed in the radon wave psychosis also. So they had a shared psychosis. They had observed their dad or husband's maladaptive behavior long enough that they were also producing that maladaptive behavior of not going outside because there might be radon waves out there. Okay, we're running out of time in this one, so we'll pick up with behavior therapies next.